the Radio Today podcast with Jen Seyderhelm.
Hi and welcome. In this podcast, we look at GfK Radio 360 Survey 3. Firstly, let's have a look at the overall results for the 5 metros. Starting in Sydney, 2GB increased their lead as the top station, with Smooth FM gaining ground also in second. This was Today FM's first full survey with their tailored to youth format, and they'll be happy with their increases, but bizarrely possibly not in the increases to the 40 to 64 age group, which isn't really where they're targeting. Kyle and Jackie O were steady and top FM breakfast behind Ben Fordham at 2GB. Triple M Sydney struggled the most, I suspect because their new lineup to start 2025 lost Tarsh Belling before the ink was dry on her contract. They have now announced show anchor Cat Lynch to replace her today, and that stability should help improve things from here. Melbourne 3AW is still number 1 and Gold 104.3 number 2, but both saw drops, and it was the second significant one for 9 Radio, even though Ross and Russ's breakfast cumes improved. Ross and Russ were number 1 in breakfast, but Jason Lauren at Nova 100 regained FM number 1. Their audience remained the same. Christian O'Connell's dropped 1%. The biggest gains overall, though, were for ABC Melbourne and Charnel Vella and Bob Murphy on breakfast, which will be a relief to the pair and to the broadcaster. Their 2% improvement saw them overtake Kyle and Jackie O, who lost their gains and more from last survey. It was also not a great result for Mick Malloy and his crew on Triple M Melbourne. I thought that the sporting season and a bit of time would have seen them improve, but not yet. Brisbane, the top 4 stations all lost a little ground, with Triple M staying number 1 overall and Ash, Lutzi and Nikki Osborne on Nova 106.9 in breakfast. The big winner, however, was 4BH and Barbecue Bob Gallagher on breakfast. I feel this also happened around this time last year. Both were up to a 9.3 audience share. Can he crack the top 3 this time around? 4BC also continued its steady improvement. Adelaide saw a changing of the guard on breakfast in one of the tightest races and markets. Mix 102.3 was number 1 station overall, increasing its lead over Triple M and Nova. But on breakfast, despite Roo, Ditz and Loz on Triple M increasing their audience share, Nova 91.9's Jodie and Hazy had a bigger gain to pinch number 1, which saw them end Roo, Ditz and Loz's 20 survey winning streak. Finally, Perth, and it was no surprise that Nath, Nat and Sean at Nova 93.7 remained number 1 on breakfast, but down 2%. However, ARN's 96 FM took over as number 1 station. Clazy and Lisa had good gains on 96 FM breakfast to close the gap, and this was one of the markets where Triple M breakfast duo Xavier and Katie have bedded in nicely. They overtook 6PR to sit 4th in that market now. An additional mention to Gary Adshead, who departed 6PR last year to join the ABC. ABC had a good survey in Perth, and Gary was up 1.2% on Drive. Steve Ahern caught up with Greg Burns, 9 Radio's head of content, about a pleasing talk survey for Sydney and Brisbane in particular.
A really good result for 9 Radio. Sydney and Melbourne clear number 1 in key shifts and overall, and a really impressive result in streaming. The streaming audience just continues to get stronger and stronger for our talk product. We like to think, and we know that it's the best way to listen to consume talk radio. And the Radio 360 figures continue to show that our dominance in that streaming market just goes from strength to strength. So that's most encouraging today. And then when we look at stations, 2GB is the standout for us, what Ben has achieved, particularly in breakfast, well up, well clear of number 2 in the market. He started the year strong and has maintained that right throughout the year. 2GB overall at a 13.6, up 0.8. It's worth noting that we had a major lineup change to start 2025. Clinton Maynard in drive has put in one of the best drive results we've had for about 4 years today. And Mark Levy, first 2 surveys of the year, clear number 1, and he hit a 15.5 in survey 2, and he's managed to hold on to that today. So that's really, really strong for 2GB. And football is really kicking in. It's our first full survey of football. And Friday, Saturday, Sunday's clear number 1. Great 2GB result. 3AW, we refer to 3AW as the voice of Melbourne, has been for many years. That dominance has been maintained today. Clear number 1 in breakfast, clear number 1 in mornings. We've identified TSL. We need to work on TSL in Melbourne. The QM is up, which is great, but we need to do some work in relation to having listeners stay longer across the day. So we've identified that in relation to Melbourne. But 3AW clear number 1 and maintaining its strength in that market. 4BC, ongoing growth. Again, a lot of change in relation to lineup over recent years. So really pleasing to see further growth in audience today across the station. And 6PR, again, a lot of audience, a lot of share change beginning of the year, shift change rather, beginning of the year. Down a little today, but some really good signs in relation to still number 1 talk in that market. We've changed times of shifts, so that's taken some time to bed in. But we've identified, again, TSL and QM is really encouraging signs for Perth. So talk-wise, a really good survey 3 for talk across the country, and that dominance in Sydney and Melbourne we're really proud of.
John Vertigan had this to say about the ACE radio network and particularly strong Brisbane results.
Yes, pretty happy for ACE Radio metro stations for survey 3. Always nice to not have a down on any of our 4 stations. We'll start in Sydney. 2UE's overall share jumped up 0.6 to 4.7, which is great. Lost a little bit in Brekkie, but we picked up nicely through the day. Mornings, afternoons and drive all up. And TSL nearly 9 hours a week, which is up 49 minutes too. So happy with 2UE. And in Brisbane, 4BH, back to its best, flying. Number 1, 40 plus across the board. Really happy with Barbecue Bob in breakfast. Mornings, afternoons and weekends as well. QM is up 12,000 and TSL's jumped up to over 11 hours a week as well. So music obviously doing its job in Bris Vegas. And in Melbourne, 3MP's QM rose by 24,000. Breakfast and morning shares up. Magic's reasonably steady. A few gains around Arvo and Drive. And we tend to look at Melbourne as combined as well. Magic and 3MP, 324,000 unduplicated QM at a combined share of 3.3. So, yeah, more listeners around the board. An all-time high for us QM-wise across the 4 stations. So some good momentum, hopefully, heading into Survey 4.
Departing ARN Chief Content Officer Duncan Campbell had this to say.
Well, Survey 3 results were they were fairly flat for ARN, really. We remained the number 2 network 10 plus. We had some highlights though. Perth in particular went to number 1, their best result in 24 years, which is pretty amazing. And Adelaide retained number 1 as well. I mean, we've got Gold 104.3, number 1 in Melbourne. KISS is number 2 in Sydney, and we've got a very tight race in Brisbane. So within those results, some sort of ups and some downs, but overall a consistent result, a solid result, which we're very happy with.
Nice to be happy with the result in the final survey chat you're going to do with Radio Info after 115 surveys, I think, in your career. Is that right?
115 surveys since I joined ARN in 2010, and it's my 15th year, so it's 15's the big number today, I think. Yeah, it's the last survey is officially as Chief Content Officer, so I leave it on June 30 and begin a consultancy with ARN for the next 12 months. So it's been an amazing journey, and the opportunity I'm incredibly grateful for, and I've been the pinnacle of my radio career so far.
SCA Chief Content Officer Dave Cameron was happy that they're still reaching the audience that matters.
Look, the biggest win for us, Steve, was at 25.54 in totality and national audience. While we spend a lot of time talking about individual stations and shows and demographics, the biggest metric that we talk about in this company is our 25-54 audience that matters. It's driving 80% of the client briefs that we see, and it's our most effective way to assess success for us is monetizing the audience that we have. So our 25-54 number, we continue to dominate that. It's been 31 surveys in a row, and we're really proud of increasing the lead there today.
And a very happy head of programming for the Smooth Network at Nova Entertainment, Peter Clay.
It's another fantastic survey around the grounds, to be honest. We're very happy with how Survey 3 has panned out for Smooth and also the Nova products. The business itself is in a great position for Survey 3. Smooth is the most listened to radio station in the country, the number 1 FM, the number 2 in Melbourne, and with record-breaking shares and cumes across the workday. I couldn't be prouder of the team and the work that they do in a very competitive landscape right now. So very happy with the results overall in Survey 3.
Before we look at the cumes and DAB Plus results for Survey 3, have you entered the Asia Podcast Awards yet? They're open now to podcast publishers across Asia and Pacific countries. If you make podcasts in Asia or the Pacific, there are 25 categories for you to enter. If you make podcasts for Asia, there is a category for you too. Everyone who enters can also opt in to win the Rode Prize, equipment from the legendary Australian microphone and podcast equipment company. There is no extra cost to enter the Rode category. All you have to do is tick the nomination box as you complete your main entry. You can find the link to the Asia Podcast Awards in our show notes, or just search for Asia Podcast Awards 2025. A quick look at the cumulative audiences for Survey 3 show that this was a great day for Nova Entertainment. In the 5 metros, they have the number 1 station for listening audience, with the exception of Adelaide, where Nova 91.9 was just a whisker behind Mix 102.3. Breakfast was the same, except that Kiss 106.5's Kyle and Jackie O maintained Fortress Sydney. Bogart Torelli at Smooth 95.3 and Fitzy and Whipper with Kate Ritchie at Nova 96.9 were 2 and 3. Nova breakfast teams lead in Melbourne, Perth, Brisbane and Adelaide with 6 of the top 12 Nova stations. The biggest growth in breakfast listening was for Nova 100's Jason Lauren, who consolidated their number 1 spot and, as also mentioned, overtook Gold 104.3's Christian O'Connell for the largest share of audience for an FM breakfast show in Melbourne. After a great survey too, Fitzy and Whipper at Nova 96.9 saw a drop of the audience gains they've seen across this year. Kate Ritchie has been absent without a return date since the start of February, and I think Nova will be aware the show's audience is tiring of checking in to find out what's happening without an answer. Same for Bo and Woodsy at Triple M 104.9 Sydney, although we now know Cat Lynch is replacing Tarsh Belling. The gains for Kyle and Jackie O in Sydney were offset by losses in Melbourne, which were also the same for Kiss 106.5 versus Kiss 101.1. There was also a significant audience drop for Gold 104.3. Today FM's New Youth formula picked up some additional listeners, while Triple J Sydney's fell away. Not so for Triple J in Melbourne, who saw impressive gains alongside the local ABC, which will please the national broadcaster. It was hard to find trends in digital radio listening across the 5 metro markets in GFK Radio 360 Survey 3. Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide and particularly Melbourne saw increased listening to ABC Sport with the 2025 football seasons in full swing, but Sydney listeners dropped away. In Sydney, Cater was still number 1, Blender Beats saw growth, but overall cumulative listening was down for digital radio, mostly across the board. Interest in Thai, Cater's AI DJ, appears to have waned somewhat too. Melbourne saw a most unexpected, massive surge of people listening to Coles Radio, giving it a cumulative audience of more than 152,000, the most of any station anywhere across Australia. Different to Sydney, Melbourne saw increased listening to DAB+, with the doubling of numbers listening to Coles Radio in the car in the afternoon, perhaps linked to a good choice for school pickups. Coles Radio pipped Smooth in Brisbane too. Smooth normally dominates in Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth, but this survey, while sister stations in Melbourne and Sydney flourished, they stalled. Sports listening was also up in Brisbane to SEN Melbourne and ABC Sports. Adelaide, Smooth FM was number one. It was fairly steady across the board with no big improver. Afternoons and weekends are when most people are tuning in. And finally, Perth, where 96 FM Gold significantly closed the gap on Smooth FM, who have for a long time been far and away the most listened to DAB Plus station in the WA capital. ARN also saw 96 FM the most listened to station. There was growth also for ABC Sport and Coles Radio. And that will about do us for a wrap on GFK Survey 3 and for me for the next couple of weeks while I take some overseas adventures. I'll catch you next time.
Radio Today with Jen Seyderhelm. Find more at radiotoday.com.au.
radiotoday.com.au